guys are listening to the Confronting Christianity podcast, and I am here with the inimitable, the amazing, the fabulous Jennifer Wilkin. You are a Jennifer, not like Jen isn't.
I am a Jennifer, yes. As Jeff likes to say, nobody called her Jen, and then everybody called her Jen, so I've gone back to calling her Jennifer. So
do you know, I've had the opposite transition.
Really?
In the UK, my generic name was Becca. That was just, what people called me, whether they, knew me vaguely or sort of decently well. And so if you knew me really well, you had to have a different variant on that. My grad school friends called me B. We just all went by like initials. And I had one friend in the UK who called me Rebecca, and it was kind of like it was his special name for me because nobody called me that. And then when I moved to the US, I thought, I don't know anyone here, and I feel a little aggrieved about being ripped away from my homeland and transplanted into a foreign country. And so I thought, I'm going to go by Rebecca. And
nice.
So yeah, now this is
nice. Well, mine was more accidental. When we moved to the Dallas area in 2007, Jeff redid all of our email accounts. And, Jennifer's such a common name, he couldn't get an email address that said Jennifer as part of it. And so he did Jen for my email. I'm not going to tell everybody what it is.
I was going to say, you
really don't want to hear from all of you.
Everyone.
And so then everybody at our new church just assumed that I went by Jen, and they started calling me that. So I can tell what era people know me from by whether they call me Jennifer or Jen.
Yes,
it's been funny. Yeah. My family is just, they do not like that people don't call me Jennifer. I was like, they'll call me Jen, and I'm like, no, doesn't work for you.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah, I again, one of my transitions here was then when I got like really, really, really close to a couple of people, and I was like, you can't call me Rebecca anymore because it just doesn't feel, I sort of need like it actually feels insufficiently intimate, even though I'm actually kind of quite used to that name.
Yeah, that's good.
We are not talking about names today, though we are talking about life seasons, I suppose, and names sometimes go with that. Jen has written a new book on aging.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm super excited about this. Dust to Dust, How to Age in an Anti-Aging World. That's not quite the title. Tell me the title.
Aging Wisely in an Anti-Aging World. Yeah.
In an anti-aging world.
Yeah.
So I want to tell you a story, Jen, from last week in my life. So my husband and I lead a community group Bible study that meets in our house. And we regularly have, about 25 people, almost all of whom are younger than us. We actually have like one or two members now who are sort of in their 40s. And, one of the guys is, I think, 3 months older than me, sort of this novel space of having people who are actually my age in the group. But, they range from the youngest members are my kids, and then a lot of people in their 20s and some early 30s, etc. And we have a habit of celebrating people's birthdays in community groups. So if it's your birthday this week, we'll make a cake, we'll sing a song. And last week, we had a little celebration of my birthday and one of my dear younger sisters in the group, who is almost exactly 21 years younger than me. And as we brought this cake out, we shoved a couple of candles in, and a young man in the group who I'm also close to, who is, I think, 31, he said, "How old are you?" And I said, 46. And he said, "Oh, that's so old." And I said, "Do you know what? I am almost certainly going to meet Jesus before you."
Yeah.
So I am perfectly happy with the fact that I am 46 and I can look down on you, oh dear, 31-year-old.
So good.
But it just struck me. I'll tell you a couple of things that struck me, and then I'd love to sort of hear more of your thoughts. The first thing that struck me was it hurt my feelings zero amounts that somebody kind of told me that I was, quote, so old.
Yeah. Which
I think when I turned 40, I actually had a moment of like, oh, I'm turning 40. That sort of feel like I have a few feelings I kind of need to navigate here. And now I'm like 46, fabulous. My 40s have been the best decade of my life so far. I feel, excited to be with the Lord one day, and also excited for the work that he's given me today to do. But one of the things I've been increasingly thinking about is how actually being serious about who Jesus is, sort of really recognizing who Jesus is, completely changes your understanding of your own age and of the process of getting older. So clearly you've been doing a lot of thinking about this, having written a book about it. But, so give us the skinny on why you wrote this book, why you felt like there was a need for this book in the first place.
Well, honestly, kudos to the guy in your home group for even saying, how old are you? Because a lot of people think that's just an off-limits question for women.
I'm not sure
in
it
general.
is kudos to him. I think he was being rude on purpose. I love him dearly.
Well, and kudos to you for answering, because it's almost like we're not, we're not going to tell you what our age is because we don't want to be a lot of it has to do with not wanting to be perceived a particular way. Like I know some female influencers who don't even want people to know how old they are because they know that once you get to be a certain age, your relevancy quotient starts to drop off precipitously. And so they just keep that a secret.
There's even an expression in England, women of a certain age.
Yeah. So people think of aging in our culture as something to be avoided or something to be ignored or something to be concealed. And they have rightly recognized that we penalize aging in our culture. We see it as a downgraded to irrelevance and obsolescence. You think about even how technology has moved over the last 100 years or so. And just even in my mother's lifetime, so she died 4 years ago, even in my mother's lifetime, how many things changed for her. But I can already feel, I'm asking my kids for help with how to use my phone or, hey, can you create a graphic for me? Because could I go figure it out? Sure. But it's going to take me way longer than I need it to, all that kind of stuff. And that's only going to get worse. Like I am only going to need their help more because things are going to continue to change. And my ability to change with those things is going to diminish. That's one of the features of aging is we're just not able to absorb change to the same degree that we could when we were younger. That's that whole thing that David Brooks talks about. Sorry, the Brooks names always get mixed up in my head. The difference between fluid intelligence and crystallized intelligence. Fluid intelligence is the gift of the young. It's the ability to innovate and think and ideate that we don't lose entirely as we age, but we move more toward crystallized knowledge, which is the ability to synthesize things that we have seen over years and years and years. Our culture doesn't value crystallized knowledge as much as it values fluid knowledge, but that's not always been the case. So some of what I wanted to do with the book on aging was address what I perceived to be a crashing silence in the church around discussions of aging, which is not going to serve us well when we look into the statistics about the graying of America. The boomer generation is rapidly aging out. We will have a full-blown late life orphan care crisis on our hands in the next 10 years or so. People don't think of the elderly in terms of orphan language, but that's one of the things that I think we're going to see. Boomer age parents and grandparents who don't live geographically close to their children because it was a value of their time period that a marker of success was that your children grew up and moved as far away from you as possible to show that they were able to manage their own nuclear family. That was the story of my parents' generation. And so these boomer parents who desperately, my mother's number one mantra was that she didn't want to be a burden. They perceive that if they need you in their extreme age, then they have somehow failed. And so the church is going to be faced with people who are members of their church who don't have immediate family living nearby to care for them or who don't have the finances, frankly, to be cared for by caregivers. And then, of course, because I've been doing women's ministry for so many years, there's that issue of appearance. And so the book is not just about that, but it does talk about that a little bit as it relates to a general theology of aging.
Wow. Okay, this is interesting because some of the things you're bringing up are different from the things that I've been particularly thinking about in this area. But one of the places where I think it all converges is in a theology of church as family which the more that I think about the modern world, the more that I think about my own life, the more that I think about the more that I read the scriptures first and foremost, the more I realize that actually what we're presented with on the pages of the New Testament is a vision of church as family, which our Western churches basically don't represent.
Right.
And that this hurts all of us in different ways and at different times. But you're pointing to one of the areas where it hurts us, which is if we, unlike the early church, I mean, my church is going through the book of Acts at the moment, and one of the first things they bump into is oh gosh, how can we care well for the widows? Which, in that culture, widows could have been 20 as much as they could have been 80.
That's right.
Far often sort of younger widows as well. But in particular, I think thinking about how to care for the elderly widows, and that was a really important concern of the early church, because these people belong to us. They are our people. We need to care for them. And because in our modern sort of Western cultural Christian context, we've so emphasized the nuclear family that we've forgotten about the church family. We then have this sense of, oh, well, wait, what? Suddenly all these older people belong to us? We have no vision for that. And certainly something that I think the New Testament would call us to have a vision for, of genuinely caring. Yeah.
And because of the Old Testament, right? I mean, that's not a new concept when we see it bubble up in the New Testament church. What the New Testament church is coming to grips with is, in a very real sense, we are the new Israel. And in the 10 Commandments, and I spent some time on this in the book, the fourth, get it right, Jan. My kids call me Jan when I'm saying dumb things. The fifth commandment, to honor our father and mother. We forget that at Sinai, those commands are given to adult heads of families. And so that Israel was functioning according to a clan system. So in other words, we picture that as hey, little kids, you need to honor your father and mother. But it has a much bigger connotation. It means, hey, adult parents, adult children, you need to honor your aging parents. And it doesn't mean just speak well of them. It means provide actual care for them as they move into their latter years. And there's a promise that your days may be long upon the land that the Lord your God is giving you. And I think we think, my mother used to always say when we were little, she'd say, you better honor me because you're going to live a long life if you do. Or if you want to live a long life, you better honor me. And she was kind of tongue in cheek with it. But I think because of that, I never thought through what the fifth commandment was really saying. And when we have the elderly in our midst who are treated with honor, both for their personhood and in their physical limitations, what can happen then is the transfer of crystallized knowledge. And that is that those people hold in a particular way the good deposit of what it means to follow Yahweh. And when we honor them, it means that we listen to that and we take it in and we are shaped by it. And so Israel was promised their days would be long upon the land if they honored their adult aging parents, because that's where they were going to receive that transmission of what it meant to follow Yahweh. That whole call in the Old Testament over again to Israel, remember, 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 do not forget. Well, who was it that was going to be transmitting that ancient message? It's that older generation with a particular form of wisdom that you only get by living a long time. And so when we look at the Old Testament, we see a couple of things. We don't see any sense of the importance of the nuclear family. The nuclear family would have been a foreign idea to the Old Testament audience that the scriptures are written to, and because they perceived a much bigger web of relationships in their understanding of family. David Brooks wrote a really great article, I think it was for the New York Times, called "The Nuclear Family Has Failed Us." And it was tracking how Americans latched onto the idea of the nuclear family and pointing out the harsh reality that the nuclear family does not have enough shock absorbers to take the brunt of any major life catastrophe. You need extended family to help absorb that. It was a fascinating article. article, and I think I didn't understand how much of my concept of what a family was had been shaped by cultural expectations rather than by biblical ones. So we transmit that into the New Testament. What do you find? You find the New Testament church where to become a part of the new Israel, to be a Christ follower, means that your extended family relationships are probably pulled away. Like, you're rejected by your family of origin because you've now embraced this new belief system that they regard as being wrong. And so in a very heightened sense, the New Testament church has to learn pretty quickly to perceive itself as the clan that Israel would have been in the Old Testament, and to say these people who are aging, these people who are not just the repositories of wisdom, but also those who will increasingly need a particular level of care, they're our responsibility, not someone else's, because we are the family of God.
Gosh, yeah, there's so much to unpack there. I think one of the things that's striking, that whole narrative, people will hear, oh, the nuclear family has failed, or a kind of, hear what you just said as an attack on the nuclear family, and an attack on the idea that marriage is good and that having children is good, and that there's so much kind of freight tied up there, especially for Christians who, for good reason, in recent decades have been sort of defending the nuclear family and saying, actually, no, we really think that marriage is a good thing. In scriptural terms, actually, not that we should denigrate singleness to elevate marriage. Actually, the New Testament kind of presents both of these things as really good ways for followers of Jesus to live healthy and sort of fruitful lives. But to say, we want to defend the idea of marriage as the only place for sexual intimacy, the only the sort of right context for that. We want to defend the value of children in a culture that actually can have a sort of very consumerist approach to children, of saying either have children because that's going to bring benefits to you, or don't have children because they're really a pain and a lot of work and sort of challenge, which is also true.
Which they are.
And from a biblical perspective, we want to say, no, it's not that we think there should be less than the nuclear family. It's actually we think there should be more than.
Exactly.
Like this is putting what we now call the nuclear family in its right context, which is within the family of church, which is a much more extensive group, including young and old, male and female, single and married, of all different sort of stages and life situations.
Yes.
I was just going to say, it's almost like, people today will talk about non-traditional family and saying, actually I can build a sense of family with people who aren't my biological relations.
Yes.
And I'd want to say, do you know what, Christians, if we're reading the Bible, Christians should have been doing that for the last 2,000 years. Not because we don't care about marriage, but because we do,
Yeah. And I think that's it. The church, let's say that you embrace the model of the nuclear family as self-sufficient, which is just the whole idea of self-sufficiency is so American, right? And you and your 2.5 children live very far from your relatives. Most of us can't go, wow, this unit is not sufficient to handle life on its own. I think I'll relocate closer to my family of origin. Some people can. For some people, their family of origin is an absolute train wreck, and that would be a bad choice. But when you are a part of the family of God, you have a working solution for that isn't just a nice second choice. It's actually a really good choice for your family. But, we live in an individualistic age. The Bible was written to a collectivist people. And just for our listeners who hear collectivist to mean socialist or communist, there is something to collectivism that isn't that. And that's just simply a recognition of the beauty of caring for one another and placing the needs of others above your own needs is a very biblical concept that we can look to. And it's what we see play out when we start to see the church as the family, the true and better family in many ways, the family that our nuclear family could never be for us. Even whether your nuclear family was the most positive experience of all, the true and better family of the church is even better. And if your if your extended family was not, or your family of origin was not commendable, then the church should be the family that pulls you up and gives you what you should have received in your home of origin.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It doesn't all the time because the church lacks vision for this, as you were saying.
Yeah, and because the church is full of disappointing people. like you and me.
Present company accepted, right?
Well,
like,
present
we're
company
delightful.
included. I think I feel like I'm sort of abounding in too many thoughts on this, so I'll try and sort of slim them down. One of the New Testament verses that comes back to me again and again and again as being relevant for almost every part of the Christian life is when Jesus says to his disciples that he, the King of all the universe, didn't come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many.
Yeah.
And there we see a vision of serving others as in and of itself a profoundly God-glorifying thing, which reframes how we think about caring for babies, reframes how we think about caring for the elderly, reframes how we think about caring for those who are sort of, for whatever reason, on the margins of society around us. Because what might look from a kind of worldly perspective like a waste of time, you spending your time caring for someone who is perhaps toward the end of their life, what are you going to have to show for that? It's not like they're going to, in 5 years' time, with babies, we sort of have this vision of, I invest a lot now and I change a lot of diapers and I do a lot of, menial tasks and I'm serving in ways that feel very unglamorous and demanding. But this is all part of a sort of future-oriented vision of this young person, growing up and it's, building into my life in various ways. You flip that to the other end of the life spectrum, and the only way that you can actually have a vision for truly sort of sacrificially loving parents, grandparents, or the elderly within your community is not because you can say, well, in 5 years' time, X, Y, or Z, but because you can say, for all eternity, this service matters. To the Lord of all the universe, this service matters. Doing something completely unglamorous and in some respects sort of thankless for somebody who is in need in whatever situation is actually the most beautiful thing you could be doing. From if Jesus is truly Lord, like there's an innate value to it.
And if we're to take his words just at face value, because if you think about when he talks about, separating those who are truly his followers from those who are not, what does he say? He says, when I was hungry, you fed me. When I was thirsty, you clothed me. When I was thirsty, you gave me drink. When I was naked, you clothed me. When I was in prison, you visited me.
When I was sick as well, yeah.
And when I was sick, and I thought about as my mother, so much of my mother's passing shaped the thinking that went into the book. She was lying in my home, and she needed all of those things. She was a prisoner of her own body. And her hunger and thirst and her clothing needs and her illness that was progressing, all of it. And those are the unseen, beautiful things, in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus says, many will say to me on that day, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy and cast out demons in your names? People think that those sign gifts are the things that will mark them out. And yet it's these quiet acts of faithfulness to the most vulnerable in our midst that show who are the true believers in the way of Jesus. And those caregiving acts that my mother needed at the end of life were virtually identical to the caregiving acts that I needed when I was her infant.
Yeah.
And so one of the things I wanted to trace in the book was, if these bookends of life are so similar, I wonder if it might be that there are other concentric similarities that work in toward midlife. And so that's the structure that I took with the book. That's the thought process that I started working through. And sure enough, there were correspondences. But I don't think that we recognize that the significance that when my mother cared for me as an infant in my complete state of dependence, never did she say, ugh, what a burden. And so when we approach caregiving for the elderly thinking, ugh, what a burden, first of all, we're confirming their worst fear. Because the difference, right, between it's same but different. The difference between an elderly person and an infant is that an elderly person actually tends to be aware of their state of need and aware of the cost to the caregiver. And an infant is not. And so when we say, oh, this is so burdensome, which is not to say that it isn't hard. There's a difference between something being hard and something being burdensome. We confirm their biggest fear, and we reinforce a cultural expectation that adulthood means you grow to autonomy and you never return to vulnerability. But everybody knows that if we're given the gift of a long life, it is, among other things, a return to vulnerability, and if we live long enough, to complete need without potentiality, right? Like you're not going to pay it back. But I think what we miss is that they've already paid it. In the care that they've given to others. It's now their season for receiving care.
Yes, and even if they haven't, actually, we worship a God who serves us when we're completely undeserving.
Yep.
And that there's no sense in which we are being sort of paid back by God for our good deeds, as it were, in the ways that he cares for us. And likewise, that when we have opportunities to care for people when we aren't going to receive back. It's almost like when Jesus says, hey, if you're going to have a dinner party, don't just invite your wealthy friends and neighbors who are going to invite you back.
Yeah.
Actually, invite the people who can't. Invite the people who are poor, the people who are needy, the people who aren't going to pay you back. And that's how we have treasure in heaven, is actually by loving the people who, for whom it's not a kind of tit for tat reciprocal, like you did this for me, therefore I'll do this for you sort of relationship, but almost what feels like a sort of wasteful giving from a purely selfish perspective, like a giving without the expectation of receiving or without having received.
Well, and even the pagans recognize this. I mean, there's a quote, I can't remember who it's attributed to, but it's you find it a lot of places, and it says that the health of a society is determined by how it treats its most vulnerable members. And you look at what's going on in Canada right now with medically assisted death, MAID, and I'm going to blow the statistic. I put it in the book of the most recent research that had come out, but the number of people who are opting into assisted suicide is just skyrocketing. Like it's more people than die from Alzheimer's and something else. It's like these typical things that kill people in old age. It is now exceeded those numbers. And you can go look up the most recent surveys that were done. But here's the thing that was so chilling to me is that a large percentage of the people who opt in to MAID, who apply for medically assisted dying in their old age, state as a primary reason that they don't want to be a burden to their children. And as long as we see each other as burdens instead of as gifts, that kind of thinking is going to persevere. So why does this matter to the church? Because the church says it's pro-life. And this issue will test whether we are only pro-life at the beginning of life or whether we are pro-life for all of life, because we have a graying population. I think the statistic is that in the next 10 years, there will be more people over the age of 65 than under the age of 18 in the United States. And so we will be tested. Either we will come up with a pragmatic solution to the problem, or we will embrace a pragmatic solution to the problem and allow others to, or we, and I expect that the culture will, but the church will be a light in the darkness if it rises to this need and says, nope, we value even life that doesn't give back because it's already given. And so we do to others as we would have done to ourselves. And I think that's a lot of what we have to do is project forward and picture ourselves in the extremity of age, because what we're seeing is that life expectancy keeps increasing. And that means that most of us are going to live a very long time. But what our quality of life is going to be in those years is a big question mark. And so when we picture ourselves as the ones receiving care, how do we want that to happen? And then how can we ensure that others are treated with that level and that kind of care and attentiveness?
A few years ago, there was a woman at our church who was diagnosed with terminal cancer. And she was a member of the church, but she went to a different service than I did. So I didn't, like, our paths hadn't really crossed a whole lot. But when the sort of membership notice went out that Grace was dying, I got in touch with her because I wanted to, bring her meals, just be part of one of these people caring for her, not least because I knew that she didn't have a ton of family kind of close by. She was a widow. And one of the things that I discovered in the course of getting to know Grace in the last sort of few months of her life was that I had thought that I was doing that just as a sort of kindness to her.
Yes.
But in fact, I learned so much from her because she is one of the few people in my life who I've had the opportunity to sort of witness them facing death in a very real way and seeing how they navigate that. And one of the things that was really beautiful and striking to me was, so her husband had died about 10 years previously. And she recounted to me a conversation she'd had with their daughter, where the daughter said to her, I think of heaven as the place where we'll see Papa again. And Grace replied, I think we're setting our sights too low. And I just thought, what a beautiful testimony of someone who is looking forward to being with Jesus. Because, she loved her husband very much. Like, they had a great marriage. It wasn't like, I don't care about seeing your dad again kind of thing. It was more, no, this sort of almost sort of secularized vision of heaven as the place where you'll go and see all your loved ones who've died actually massively undersells what Christians believe in, which is that when we go to be with Jesus, this is like love and life beyond our wildest dreams. This is like the whole new beautiful beginning with the one to whom the absolute best marriage, pointed. Like there's just this beautiful expectation in the face of death, and walking with Grace, she was real about the ways in which it's no fun dying of cancer. Like, it is just it's painful and miserable and assaults you in physical and emotional ways. So it wasn't that she was kind of papering over that. And at the same time, for me to be able to witness her walking through that when, my guess is that at some point in my life, unless I'm sort of hit by a car or so, most likely I will also die a relatively slow death.
Yes.
And
in a manner we don't choose.
In a manner we don't choose. And having that opportunity to witness her, not only her kind of courage in the face of death, but also her very real expectation when it comes to the Lord. Because in my heart, I truly believe that when I die, I'm going to go to be with Jesus, and that one day he's going to bring heaven and earth back together and I'll live with him for all eternity. Like, if you ask me, do I believe that? Yes. And I hope that if somebody walked into my house now and said, if you believe that, come with me, you're going to be executed, I would say, sign me, like, I'm ready. But just being in relationship with someone who was walking that path in a much more immediate sense was so sort of spiritually helpful to me. And it was just a reminder to me that sometimes people who might see themselves only as a burden on those who are caring for them, or those who are sort of in relationship with them, actually might be much more of a blessing than they even realize, of being able to impart that wisdom.
Well, and that's the thing. The Bible speaks of the wisdom of the elderly. And, that's why it says gray hair is a crown of glory. And I think another thing that we need to remember about that is everybody's like, oh, so I can't dye my hair. And I'm like, whatever, that's not what we're really talking about here. But one of the things that's interesting about that is when you look at life expectancy across human history, at the turn of the century, so turn of the previous century, so 1900, average life expectancy in the United States was hovering around 47 years. And most recent statistics, it's at 80. Yeah. It's risen to 80. Well, now, so that means what's 80 minus 40? That's 33 extra years that we can count on, roughly, being alive now. 33, that's living almost twice as long average life expectancy as, a little over 100 years ago. Most of us are going to spend that scrolling Instagram, but, it's nice to have.
Let's hope not.
Yeah, let's hope not. And then you go back to biblical times. And in the ancient world, average life expectancy was between 25 and 35 years. Now, that's not because people didn't live beyond the age of 35. It's because there were very high infant and child mortality rates, right? So statistically, I have 4 children, and if I had lived in Bible times, I would have expected that one of those children would not survive to age 1 and another would not survive to age 10. That's just what it looked like statistically. So if you outlived childhood and managed to not die in childbirth or fighting in a war, then you might expect to live to be 50 or 60 years old, which is plenty of time to get gray hair, but still a relatively short time to be alive. And so one of the reasons that the Bible speaks of age the way that it does is because age was understood. If you got gray hair, you were considered highly favored, like you had dodged a lot of things, to get there.
Yeah.
And so we take for granted so much of just the kind of health care that we receive, and we see aging as something we expect, not something that we're surprised by or a privilege. And the Bible sees it very much as a privilege. Long life is a gift from the Lord. So, and if it's a gift, then it means that we're supposed to steward it, right? So we just have a whole different outlook on things than the original audience that the scriptures were written to would have had. And what I find is that when people start having the conversation about, especially like medical aesthetics, it's sort of even in Christian circles, it's like, well, you do you, boo. It's your biz. But the Bible doesn't say anything we do fits into that category. And what I find is not that most people haven't thought about medical aesthetics, it's that they haven't thought about aging. They haven't thought about what the Bible says about aging. And so that's one of the things that I'm really hoping to do in the book is just give a vision, a beautiful vision for what aging is supposed to do. And it fits into what you just were saying, that the burden of caring for someone in extreme age or even in later age is also a gift. And we're so focused on our own needs and our own quality of life, even that, it's like, well, I'm going to not have kids so I can travel. Well, imagine then when you find out you have an aging parent who needs your help and you're, just hitting retirement, you finally have the funds and the flexibility to travel again, you're going to view that the same way, right? Mm-hmm. And so a lot of what I want to do in the book is reframe our understanding of the gift of aging, both to the caregiver and the receiver of care, and to the one who makes it all the way to the end, who does become, in a very real sense, not just a prisoner of their own body, but also freed up from other distractions by that quote imprisonment to finally give full attention to worship of the Lord in a way that they might not have when their body was busy being about other work. Yeah.
So here's what I want to do, Jen, if it's okay with you. I want to land this plane for a moment here and then take another, like I'm thinking in terms of the indirect flight that I'm going to take with my family next week. And record a second little episode specifically focused on middle age, if that's okay with you. Can we do that?
Oh, yeah. That'd be great.
Fantastic. Okay, so guys, you've been listening to Confronting Christianity podcast. And we're going to be back next week to talk about middle age in particular. Between now and then, think about the people in your life who you might reach out to with love, who currently might be feeling like they're a burden on others, or they are forgotten or unwanted. Just see if you can take one little step toward them, and we will be back next week.